Great. So I see there's a question from Frank that is kind of a good segue into our second part, which is, as a teacher, I think the main problem is in the evaluation. It seems as a tool like any other or as cheating. Are we evaluating the student or the AI the student is using? So that's a great segue because we definitely wanted to talk about policy and plagiarism and in higher education. So in terms of my own experience with publishing, et cetera, there are some publishers out there like Frontiers who are using traditional AI to try and detect publishing and even include it into their peer review process to a small extent, but not generative AI as far as I know. So in the publishing world at the moment, people are still looking at it with that skeptical eye, but they're looking at it. They're considering it because more and more papers are published every day, right? But let's maybe delve into the educator side and what universities are actually doing, what their policies are, how's that coming into play. So maybe Bethany, I'll hand it over to you in terms of what you're seeing at your institute, and then I might ask Divya to also chime in a bit because she does work with the same student population as you as well, and we can maybe compare and contrast Centrale Superlec and Institut Polytechnique de Paris.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, that's actually very, very interesting. Policies. Oh boy. And it's interesting that we saw a lot of higher education establishments kind of jumped onto the bandwagon very early. That was back in December of last year, January, when a lot of higher education institutions in France failed to create policies regarding ChatGPT. And I'll have to say that it's here across the highway, we are constantly having this discussion, is having this in comparing what other higher education institutions are doing, because I'll tell you what, it's actually not consistent across the board. I wanted to share something with you guys really, really quickly that I found fascinating. I went and I looked at, I'm going to go and try to find it. You have to see, there it is. I don't know if you guys can see my slide.
Yes.
This is just a very small cross section of universities in the United States. And I went on their websites and I tried to find the current policies they have for using AI. Now, normally what I would do is I would let people just read this, but I understand that some of you might be eating lunch at the same time. Some of you might be driving. So I'm just going to recap very quickly kind of each of the four universities. So apologies for those of you who are reading and hearing my voice at the same time. Harvard Business School seems to support responsible experimentation with generative AI tools. This is from September 1st, 2023. That's when the last time it was updated. But it's also important to keep considerations in mind. For example, security, data privacy, compliance, copyright, and academic integrity. That's what Sam was kind of mentioning a bit earlier. And I think that's a really good policy to have on campus. Then you shift to Stanford, which is very interesting because here they're saying using generative AI tools to substantially complete an assignment or exam is not permitted. But then they go on to say in the same paragraph, students should by default default to disclosing such assistance when in doubt. And then they also say in the same paragraph, individual course instructors are free to set their own policies regulating the use of generative AI tools in their courses. This one seems to be where a lot of higher educations seem to be most comfortable, because then they don't have to strong arm anyone into doing anything. But anyway, it's food for thought. Then you have UCLA. it says, unless otherwise specified by the faculty member. So this is where they've given all the power to the faculty members. All submissions, whether in draft or final form, meet the course requirements and must either be the student's own work or must clearly acknowledge the source. And you know what's funny is the source. Not too long ago, one of my colleagues here at Telecom Paris, Melania Bergelis, she received a paper from one of our students, and he put in his bibliography one source, ChatGPT.
Oh, gosh.
We kind of had a nice laugh over that. But you guys should expect it to happen in your case as well. And finally, Wesleyan University, all content generated through the use of ChatGPT is to be understood and identified as co-authored by the user and the AI. That's August 2023. So bottom line on this is that now students and higher education establishments, international relations departments, because these are the departments that are helping our students apply for their partner organizations. They all have an extra layer of work, and that is to look up the AI policies of the institutions that they want to apply for. And this goes for the PhD students as well, because if they're going to be going and doing any kind of research in these institutions, they absolutely need to be aware of these policies, and they are going to change because they're going to be updated. So sorry, it's just another extra layer of work that we have to be aware of. That's a long answer to your question, but I had to say it.
I'll try quickly, Melissa, and then hand over.
Perfect.
Just to compare with the UK, so on Monday we had a conversation with the Russell Group, who, as a lot of you may know, released their Principle of Use in AI in Education in July this year. So July already feels like such a long time ago. And I'm part of a working group here at Centrale Supélec that's creating the sort of academic integrity charter around AI. So not to reveal any of the confidential exchanges within this working group, but what I will reveal is that the process of working on this for the past 3 months has really been one of funneling down what is really achievable, because we can't control everything. I think that's really what we've come to realize. And the dialogue that we're trying to have with our students is very much what is academic integrity? How can you be an ethical student? And reframing what it means to them to be a student in higher education and to do work that they're proud of, quite simply, you know. And I'm noticing Stacey and Frank's comments in the chat as well around laziness, the idea of laziness, the idea of outsourcing. You know, I don't know how I feel about the co-authoring factor of LLMs, because an LLM is an LLM. It's not a co-author, you know. An LLM is not an author. But yes, so that's just a very quick comment, and I can't give you much more detail, but we will be releasing our own charter soon. And we've agreed to talk to our friends at the Russell Group again in sort of February, March to see how it's gone, because they haven't even gone through an assessment cycle yet. Because I think the really interesting question, as Frank raised earlier as well, is what will happen in assessment, you know?
Great, thank you, Divya. Sam, did you have any contribution to that?
So maybe I could just pick up on the laziness comment, and I also saw in the chat, just because I think this is an interesting point, right? So I think on one side, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise that if there is a kind of a way to make things easier, people will choose it, right? Like this is, if you kind of think of humans like a fluid, like if there's a gap in the pipe, you're going to get a leak, right? And so this isn't, you know, unexpected in any way. But I think that the interesting thing is that, you know, we see, you know, teachers and supervisors and educators worried about students being lazy, but we're often not asking whether the educators themselves are being lazy and not updating their way of evaluating the performance of the students, right? You know, we're saying we don't want you to use these tools because we don't want to have to change the way we're checking, you know, how well you've understood the material, how much you've learned, and so forth. You know, we're saying make our life easier by not using this tool. And this is an interesting, because it kind of goes both ways, right? Of course, we want students to work hard, we want them to make effort, we want them to actually learn the lesson that's being taught. But if we're trying to handcuff them in say for not using certain tools, I don't know if we're really getting to the heart of the problem.
Okay, right. And when we think of just the goal, if we're training our students to be future researchers and we are looking at what publishers are also doing, they don't want to have AI as a co-author as well, right? Scientific journals have updated their policies and they're doing it every day, but they prohibit the use of AI generated text in manuscript and AI co-authorship. That specific text is being used in various policies across publications, right? So already it's there for the goal. So I don't know if it would help to think of making that concrete for the students. Well, you can do this now, and maybe it's lazy, maybe it's time saving, but at some point you're going to have to generate your own. You're going to have to generate your own publications, and as so many of us have experienced, we have this similar experience. We don't see postdocs, we don't see senior faculty members. This isn't their instinct, is to sit and write a prompt that says, "Please write me an abstract," because integrity, right? You have to be able to stand behind what you write. That's the proof of your intellectual authority. So, in terms of the laziness and the time saving, but I also kind of want to bring up English as a second language students for whom they are competing against English as a first language students. And for them, instead of spending, all up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning trying to write something comparable to their cohorts, they're looking at ChatGPT as a way to help them, to help kind of equal the playing field. So we haven't quite touched upon that as well, about equality versus inequality. And then what does that mean for plagiarism and detectors, right? I think we've put a couple of resources on the Miro board in terms of the biases inherent against English as a second language writer. And I think, Bethany, you can maybe speak a little bit to that, to the detectors that are out there and how they're biased against our second language learners.
Yes, we've been seeing some quite frightening research in this area where they just I don't need to talk because I'm careful at the time, but we're seeing quite a bit of research that's showing that these that detectors are indeed biased against non-native speakers of English, and that's a damn shame. And so I'm still looking at some of these articles. There's still, showing of small cross sections of students. Again, it's something I'm definitely keeping an eye on. But I've posted a couple of articles on the Miro board to that, in case anybody's interested. Because if the reason I did that is because I hear a lot of institutions that say, well, we have AI detectors on campus, so there's no point in using it because we'll be able to determine if you're using it. Okay. But at the same time, you're running a real risk at having these detectors if whatever you're using, whatever tool you're using to do that. I mean, I saw a teachers union in the US, like a huge teachers union in the US had just adopted an AI detector. And some of us on social media, we were just like, oh, no, because we kind of knew what was going to happen. And there were a lot of comments saying, but don't you realize that this is going to cause a lot of issues in terms of bias against the non-native speakers of English, of which there are loads of them in the United States. So just be aware of that moving forward.
Yeah. Again, it's kind of knowing your tool, right? If you're aware that what the tool is being trained on is on data sets that are based on a monoculture, right? So the Anglophone culture, that has traditionally been, only in English as a first language speakers, then what are you going to get out of it when you go and try to use them in terms of detectors for plagiarism and for things like that? So, and I agree with Bethany in the sense that this research is incredibly new. I think the paper that I've just read it's a white paper even right now on archives, and just came out in November. So to be aware of these, that detectors are also not the end all and be all of things. When I mentioned frontiers and how they're using traditional AI to detect plagiarism, et cetera, it's the first pass. So even our scientific institutions who are using AI to do things like detectors, they're not relying solely on it. It's the first pass. A human does come into it to double check and make sure that there isn't something untoward happening. And because again, these are people's careers. You're accused of plagiarism. And there's, I think that same paper was talking about the false positives. I mean, talk about, somebody doesn't get into a program because they've been accused of it, but nothing has actually untoward has actually happened. So just to touch base on that in terms of publishing and also in higher education institutions, and as departments are thinking about what they need to consider when it comes to detectors, because we're all overloaded, aren't we? We're all trying to figure out ways to still provide quality training and education and make sure our students are learning, but at the same time, we've got loads of work to do, right? So if a detector can help, okay, but again, thinking about what is the tool doing for us.